In the next question of homework part 4, we're going to look at reserves supply. And reserve supply is got two components. It's got a vertical section and a horizontal section. The vertical section, if you remember from the notes, is just the quantity of reserves. And since non-borrowed reserve or borrowed reserves is 0, borrowed meaning borrowed from the Federal Reserve, and the quantity of non-borrowed reserves is 32.48, the total quantity of reserves in the banking system currently is just $32.48 billion. Now, the Fed has set the target for the federal funds rate equal to 2.82. Under the current policy, that means the discount rate must be 3.82, 100 basis points higher. And that, because the discount rate ends up being under a normal situation, under normal conditions, it's a non-binding price ceiling. It ends up kinking the supply curve of reserves at 3.82, the value of the discount rate. So let's go ahead and hit enter and see what happens. Okay, so we got both those right. So the supply curve is right here. Without this non-binding price ceiling on reserves, the supply curve would look like this. It'd be a vertical line. Okay? But because the discount rate ends up being a non-binding price ceiling, it kinks the supply curve at the discount rate. So this height here, this height is the discount rate of 3.82. And this price of reserves is the federal funds rate, the federal funds interest rate. And the quantity of reserves is just denoted R, and this would be called the supply of reserves. Okay, and that's how you do it. That's how you'd label it. And this value here would be the 32.48, halfway between 30 and 35. Okay, so that's the supply for reserves. Now, if required reserves is 0.1 and the checkable deposits is 290, then required reserves is just 10% of the 290, so 29. What are excess reserves then? Well, excess reserves are whatever's left over. So total reserves is 32.48. And we got to subtract off the required reserves of 29 to get the excess reserves. Okay, and then I can have Excel calculate the value of excess reserves over here by just typing equal and then 32.48 minus 29, which is 3.48. Okay, so excess reserves is usually much lower than required reserves. At least that was the case before the financial crisis. Now, if the Fed raises the target federal funds rate by 75 basis points, the new federal funds rate target is what? Well, we got to add 75 to the old target. The old target was what? The old target was 2.82. So we're adding to the old target 0.75. Okay. 0.75 percentage points is 75 basis points. So over here I'm going to calculate that addition, and I get the new target of 3.57. So given current discount rate policy, the discount rate is 100 basis points higher than the target, so the new discount rate would be 4.57. Now the quantity of reserves hasn't changed, so the vertical section is still at 32.48. So the vertical section is still at 32.48 here, right? So the vertical section is 32.48. The horizontal section is the new discount rate of 4.57. Okay, so if I go over here, you can see that I'm at 4.57, and here you can see that the old supply curve, which is underneath the red supply curve, is at 3.82. So this is 3.82, and this is this is 4.57. Okay, so the supply curve shifted upward vertically, right? Required reserves is still 29. Because total reserves didn't change. All the Fed did was issue a new dictate that the discount rate and the target federal funds rate were just higher. So that doesn't change required reserves or excess reserves. So excess reserves is still 3.48. Hit enter to see if we got it right. Yep, we got it right. Now the Fed decides to lower its target for the federal funds rate by 100 basis points. The federal funds interest rate target is now what? Well, we got to subtract 100 off this, right? So it drops down to 2.57. And remember the discount rate policy of the Fed. It's going to set the discount rate 100 basis points above its target. So this is going to be 3.57. So the horizontal section is going to be 3.57. And we're not changing reserves, so the vertical section of reserves is still 32.48. Right? Because we haven't changed it. So the Fed just raised the federal funds rate target and its discount rate, and then it lowered both of them together, right? So just raising and lowering them. So it had it set here, then it shifted the supply curve up by increasing the target and the discount rate. Here it lowers the discount rate and the target, right? So the quantity of reserves is still 32.48, that value right there. Sorry. I'm on a different problem. Oh, yeah, so I'm not asking about what happened here. We're just asking about the vertical section and the horizontal section. So let's go ahead and enter. Okay, now in scenario D, if the Fed conducts an open market sale of $5.54 billion, that's going to lower the quantity of reserves from 32.48 to 5.54. Okay. Whoops, I got to put this over here. The vertical section is now that. The quantity of reserves will decrease. Quantity of reserves decreases by the $5.54 billion. Now, the discount rate is going to hold constant at this level of 3.57, right? And you can see that here. So the quantity of reserves actually fell, right? And the horizontal section remained at 3.57. So copy. We'll calculate this value in Excel. So the new quantity is 26.94. So I'm going to replace that subtraction with 26.94. Maybe we'll try falls here. Decreases falls. Okay, there we go. So we see here that the discount rate remains constant at 3.57, but the quantity of reserves falls by 5.54 to 26.94. Okay, so that's about 27 there, right? Or 26.94. Now, if the Fed lends $6.9 billion in discount loans to banks during a financial emergency, the quantity of borrowed reserves now equals, well, it was 0 before, but now it's 6.9, right? And total reserves, the Fed's adding these reserves to these reserves here, right? So he's got to add this to the amount of discount loans, right? And so the new quantity of reserves is this total here of 33.84. Okay. What are required reserves equal to? Well, if we go back to our original scenario, required reserves are still 29 because we haven't done anything to checkable deposits, and nothing's happened to the reserve required ratio. So required reserves are still 29 billion. And excess reserves is the difference between that and this. So let's just subtract that. 33.84 minus required reserves gives us 4.84. And we'll go ahead and enter to see if we got it right. We should. Okay. So what happened to our supply curve? Well, the discount rate is still, we haven't done anything to the discount rate, our price ceiling. So the horizontal section of the curve is still at 3.57, right? So 3.57. But the vertical section is now 33.84. Okay, because total reserves increased to 33.84, right about there. Okay, so this is what reserves were before the Fed made these discount loans. This is what reserves are now after those discount loans, and that difference is $6.9 billion. Okay, so let's go ahead and enter. Okay, and then we just got a couple things left to do. If the discount loans are paid off 1 year after they were issued, banks pay the Fed a total of blank $1 billion in interest. So the way we calculate this is we take the quantity of discount loans that the Fed made and we multiply that by the interest rate, right? The annual interest rate, the discount rate, right? So we got to calculate that over here in Excel. So the Fed makes $6.9 billion in discount loans. Those loans are paid off a year later at 3.57. So the total amount of interest banks have paid the Fed over the course of a year is 0.25. 0.25. Let's go ahead and enter, see if we got it right. Okay, my open math here wants 3 decimal places, 2.246. Okay. If banks immediately pay off the discount loans with loans from other banks, well, instead of paying 3.57 to the Fed, they're only paying 2.57 to other banks because that's the federal funds market target, right? Right. So the Fed is really good at keeping the federal funds rate at its target, and its target currently in the purple situation is 2.57. So the banks can lower their interest payments from $0.246 billion down to $0.177 billion. Okay. Thus, borrowed reserves generally equal zero, right? And why is that? Well, maybe it was very difficult for banks to borrow excess reserves from other banks because excess reserves were really close to zero for all banks. So the banks have to go to the Fed to get these loans. Well, once they get the loan, is there an incentive to get rid of discount loans? Yeah, because the interest rate is higher. They're going to pay higher interest over the course of a year. So they have this huge economic incentive to now search for a private bank in the Federal Reserve System that can make them a loan because they have excess reserves, right? So there's this huge incentive for banks to pay off these Fed loans immediately. And that's why borrowed reserves are generally equal to zero. Okay? Okay, so if borrowed reserves are zero, the non-borrowed reserves would be equal to the total amount of reserves. All right. Hit enter to see if we got it right. And we did. And that is reserve supply.